When it comes to personal brand photography, you don't need top of the line gear. Hear me out. With personal brand photography, you have time to get the shot right. And actually, I encourage you to take the time to get the shot right. It's not like weddings where you only have one chance to get the first kiss, which means as personal brand photographers, we can use this to our advantage when it comes to investing in lenses and we can save that money. You don't need the best or the fastest focusing lenses because you have a little bit of extra time in personal branding, portraits, and sessions. I use 3 prime lenses for all of my personal branding photo shoots. I prefer primes because I love the wider aperture. I prefer to use natural light when I can. I'll still use artificial light if it's needed, but being able to stop down to 1.4 or 1.8 is great for lower light situations. And I'm shooting a lot indoors as a personal branding photographer. Prime lenses are also a lot lighter than zoom lenses, and I like to keep my kit simple. It's very light. I take everything with me in just a backpack. My 50mm 1.4 is my absolute go-to. It is the Nifty 50, and I use it for almost all of my shots. I don't even use the Z-mount lens. I have a Nikon mirrorless. This is the Nikon Z6 Mark II, but I used to have a Nikon D750. I sold it, don't even have it anymore. But I wasn't about to go and upgrade all of my lenses to Z-mount lenses when I already have the, what is this? The F-mount lens. So I use the adapter to make my F-mount lenses work with the mirrorless. Now, do I want the 50mm 1.2? Do I want the 58mm that Nikon has? Absolutely. But do I need it for personal brand photography? No. This lens is less than $500. If you get the 1.8, it's even cheaper. This is the 1.4. I could shoot an entire session on this and be a happy camper. I find the 50mm to be the most versatile lens because you can use it for really everything you need in personal brand photography, meaning wide shots, headshots, verticals, horizontals, detail shots, shots of props, everything. The 50mm focal length most closely represents what we see with our natural eye. So when you see photos taken with a 50, it looks like what you would see if you were actually there. And that's perfect for personal brand photography because we want everything to look natural. We want people to just look like they're in the scene. The 50 is great also because I can get a variety of compositions while standing in the same place. And what I mean by that is I can get a vertical shot, a horizontal shot, waist up shot, one where the subject is off to the third. It's awesome because when you're delivering personal brand photos, you need these different compositions. You don't know where the end photo is going to be used, so I try to deliver as much variety in composition for the same pose as possible. I do use the 50mm for headshots, which goes against some traditional portrait photography rules. When I shoot headshots for personal brand photography, I'm not going for the standard corporate look because it's not going on some employee directory. It's going on a small business owner's website. And we want our small business owners, our clients, to look as natural and friendly as possible. So to do that, I use the 50. I usually will shoot waist up as a headshot. They can crop in if they need to, but most of the time they need more space around the photo to add text, to add graphics, or other design elements. Now, I will still capture a more traditional headshot, but to do that, I use my 85mm, and this is the 1.8. Don't even have the 1.4. This is again an F mount, and I saved a lot of money by not upgrading to the 85mm 1.4 Z mount. I've honestly never felt like I've needed the 1.4 when I'm shooting on my 85. And if you feel like you need more light, you probably need to bring in artificial off-camera lights anyway. I use my 85 mostly for headshots, or if I'm outside or in a big enough space where I can back up to get the shot that I want, then I'll throw on my 85. I really love the compression and the bokeh that this lens gets me, but the reason I don't use this as much as my 50 is because I don't want to tempt myself to shoot too many tight shots. I keep saying this, but when it comes to branding, wider is usually better. If I kept my 85 on all the time, I find myself falling back into my more traditional portrait habits, and I will end up with shots that are too close. There's not any space on the edges, and you can't really use a lot of those in brand photography. So when in doubt, always shoot wider. My last used lens is my 35mm. I did splurge on this a little bit. I got influenced at the beginning of my photography journey by some YouTubers. This is the Sigma 35mm 1.4. I love this lens. This is also an F mount, so I use the adapter for all of these. And before I understood how lens distortion worked, I used this lens all the time. I used it for absolutely everything, including headshots. Then I learned about lens distortion, and what happens if you shoot a headshot on a 35mm, it can make somebody's head appear much larger than it actually is. Nowadays, I only pull out this lens if I can't get the shot that I need with my 50mm. That's usually if I'm in a small studio or a small space. Or if I'm shooting a larger flat lay where there's lots of props and stuff in the scene, I will throw on my 35mm if I can't fit everything on my 50. One thing you have to be careful about when you're using the 35 is the lens distortion. What it looks like is that fisheye look or that vignetting look where around the edges of the photo it looks darker. I really don't like that, and it doesn't really work well for brand photography. Because if you think of the end use of the photo, it's usually on a website or it has other elements surrounding it. So if you put a photo that has heavy vignetting or heavy lens distortion on a website, it becomes very obvious. Websites and promotional graphics usually have sharp lines and edges. So if you're shooting something with distinct shapes, like there's straight lines in the background or in the foreground or whatever you're shooting, and it's distorted, that becomes very obvious when you put that photo on a website, and it just doesn't look as polished as it should be. You can take care of some of this in editing, but I prefer to use my 50 whenever possible because there's less editing and less lens distortion straight out of the camera. Now, if you absolutely have to use your 35mm, and if I have a person in frame, what I do is try to put them in the center of the frame. I try not to have people on the edges of the frame because then it will make whatever is on the edges of the frame appear wider than it is in person. When it comes to personal branding sessions, the 35 is the widest I will go. I do have a couple of honorable mentions. One is the one that I'm filming on right now. It is the Tamron 28-75. This is also not for a Nikon camera. For video work, I use my Sony a7 IV. The only reason that I have this is because I also do video work for my clients. When I'm shooting video, I find having a zoom lens to be a lot easier. I don't know what it is. I just really don't like shooting video on a prime lens. Hi, I feel that I have to mention this. I don't zoom while I am shooting video. Like I don't hit record and then zoom in while I'm shooting. I just like the flexibility of having a zoom lens while I'm shooting video so I'm not constantly switching lenses all the time. That's all. So what my typical setup looks like when I'm out on a shoot with a client is my Nikon on my black rapid strap, and I use this for photo. And then I use my Sony for video, and that's on my gimbal. Then I don't have to flip between photo and video settings on a single camera. It's really nice to have that separation of concerns. I almost never use my Sony camera for photos. I do like it though. The only time I use my Sony for photos is if I'm shooting an event like a conference or a retreat. Another lens that deserves an honorable mention, I don't have it anymore, but it is a macro 100mm lens. I've had two different versions of this. I honestly don't remember the brand. As you can tell by watching this video, I don't like to invest in the fanciest gear because the cheap gear works if you know how to use it. I think at one point I had a used Nikon 100mm, and another point I got a used, I think a Tamron off of KEH, and that one didn't even have autofocus. That was a manual focused lens. I specifically would use this macro lens for product photography, even more specifically for shooting fine pieces of jewelry. I am not doing a lot of product photography anymore, which is why I sold it, but I found that it made a huge difference when I'm shooting very small things like small pieces of jewelry, even small props. It just makes life so much easier and the quality of the photo turns out so much better. Honestly though, if I had to get rid of my lenses and only hold on to my nifty 50, I wouldn't be that mad about it. In my next video, I'm going to show you how I actually photograph a personal branding photo shoot with these lenses. I'll see you there.